Good evening and welcome to the OTF Webinars Connect sessions. Tonight, this is a special one for you kindergarten teachers, learning through project work. Very excited to have Tracy and Cheryl back. This is not their first time presenting. They are one of our most popular sets of presenters. And I will brag a little bit that I got the chance to pop into Tracy's room today. We happen to both be working in the same board, and no surprise there, what a welcoming, friendly, great feeling room to be a part of. You're in for a real treat tonight. You're going to hear about an incredible project. I'm very excited to turn the microphone over to Tracy and Cheryl. Thanks for joining us tonight, everyone.
Hi guys, we are excited to connect with everybody online tonight. We have lots of great information to share, and if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to add them in the chat. If it's something that we know we're going to get to throughout the presentation, we might just park that question and let you know, and then we'll get to it either in our slides or we'll come back to it at the end as well. We will leave a little bit of time at the end for any questions that you have as well. So, who are we? Cheryl and I have been teaching together as a kindergarten team for 7 years. We're pretty fortunate to have been together for so long together in the classroom, and we do lots of presentations both online and in person. I know Tricia shared our blog there in the chat. We do write a blog, and we're both really active on social media as well. So we would love to connect with you after this webinar and stay connected and grow in our learning together too.
So we'd like to get a sense of who else is in the chat room tonight. So if you could share your name, if you have a Twitter handle, you can share that as well, and also your role in education. And it might be, since there's so many people, it's going to go fairly quickly in the chat, but just remember that when you come back to re-record and watch it, you'll be able to look back and look through those pieces too, so you'll be able to see that. So let us know who you are, what your role is, and if you have any social media connections. See a lot of familiar names, people we've met before or maybe had in past workshops, which is exciting too. Nice to see a little bit of variety. Great, welcome Melissa, first time in kindergarten next year, so hopefully this will be helpful for you to start getting your brain into kindergarten mode. We have some occasional teachers and some DCEs, so it's going to be a great blend of collective knowledge tonight. Awesome. Great. So before we get into project work, we also just want to get a little sense of your comfort level. So you're going to provide a red X if you're pretty new to project work and you're trying to figure out what project work is, or a green check if you've engaged in project work with students before.
That'll just give us a bit of an idea as to where everybody is, so that as we continue on, we'll know where your experience lies. Or we can turn off our speaker. How's that? Does that sound better, Caitlin? Perfect. If at any time you can't hear us well, just let us know and we can always try and adjust our microphone too. Okay, so it looks like a fairly even split again, with quite a few people that are pretty new to project work, and then some people who look like they've maybe dabbled in project work themselves in the classroom too. So hopefully those who have had opportunities to engage with project work, you'll be able to share some of your expertise as we go through some of this tonight as well. So we wanted to start by just offering a couple of definitions, because I think sometimes when we begin to engage in project work, there's a lot of different words and definitions, and people start to feel a little bit confused about, are these all the same thing or are these things different? So I wanted to start with what is inquiry? And we wanted to stress that inquiry isn't a thing. It's not something that you do. Simply put, it's a personal path of questioning, investigating, and reasoning that takes us from from not knowing to knowing. And it's really just a stance. It's a way that we engage with children. And so that's sort of, some people confuse, they say, I'm doing an inquiry on something. But really, what you're often doing is you're inquiring alongside your students, and you're engaged in a topic that's maybe of interest to you or the children.
So again, to sum that up, according to the Capacity Building series, inquiry-based learning is an approach to teaching, learning that places students' questions, ideas, and observations at the center of the learning experience.
Another form of learning that sometimes is confused with that is problem-based learning. So problem-based learning is a student-centered pedagogy in which students learn about a subject through the experience of solving an open-ended problem. Students learn both thinking strategies and domain knowledge. And so it's similar to project-based learning, but often this language is interchanged within the construct of our learning. And the last one, what we're going to talk mostly about tonight is project-based learning, which does involve inquiry, and it sometimes does involve this problem-based learning as well. But when we engage in project-based learning, it's a method of teaching in which an in-depth study of a particular topic is conducted by a child or a group of children. So we want to start with a short clip. And so Trisha's going to share that clip in the chat, and it's only a couple of minutes. So we're going to ask you to watch that clip, and then you'll come back and we'll continue on. Once you're back in, if you just give us a green check, then we'll know that you're finished watching the clip.
Just before I put that in there, we have somebody with their hand up if they want to ask a question. It doesn't look like they are. So I'm just going to put the link in.
Great, thank you.
So it looks like we have the majority of the people back into the chat room with us, and we couldn't agree with you more with some of the comments that were posted. This video really resonated with Tracy and I, and it really gave us almost permission just to slow down. So often when we're involved with the early years, we get so caught up in the busyness of things and the time and how we're going to get everything accomplished in a day, that when we really do slow down and really connect with the children, build relationships, find out what their interests are, that really led us to a major spark in our fire project that we're going to share today.
We love this quote by Carol Ann Ween. What do teachers do that gets children so excited that they feel like learning is a birthday party? And I still remember each year we usually engage in one larger scale project, sometimes a couple. But I remember our very first project was focused on dance. And I remember opening the door and seeing the children standing outside with materials to support their learning, with big smiles on their faces, and they were so excited to be at school every day. And Cheryl and I felt the exact same way. We would walk into the classroom in the morning and we were so excited. Project work creates this big excitement in the room, and energy and enthusiasm and engagement in learning. And so we hope today when we share, we're going to start off by sharing a little bit about project work, We're going to learn a little bit from some of the experts, and then we're going to take you from the beginning to end through one of the projects that we engaged in with our students.
Every year we try and think of some rich texts that can support some of our understanding in areas that we want to promote some of our professional growth. So these are two texts that Tracy and I both read that really fostered a lot of our understanding around project work, and we'll share a little bit of that insight tonight as you see our project unfold.
So Lillian Katz is a leading expert in the project approach, and we're going to share a video by her a little bit later on. So that's the book on the left. And the one on the right, if you're coming from a primary grade or you're looking to engage with junior students within your school, Ron Berger talks a lot about excellence through project work, and it's a book that engages from K to 8. So it's a really great book that we read as a whole school to think about how we could engage with the ethic of excellence with all of our students. So if you're looking for some book club ideas or books to share with colleagues, those are great ones to get started too.
So when does project work happen? It can depend on your flow of the day and your group of students, but it could also happen during learning centers, small group, whole class, during gym, or in a quieter time. But we want to stress that it's not the only thing happening in the room. So even though you're going to see lots of rich examples of our fire project unfold, they all weren't happening at once. Our whole room didn't turn into this big fire station, and every single provocation became something related to the project. It happened in the environment when it made sense, and when we were sort of fostering some of the learning that was coming from some of our research that we were doing with the children.
So how long does a project last? It really varies depending on how long the children's interest is sustained, the complexity of the project, the depth of the project, and the time that you have available in that school year. So some projects take place over a week or two, and other projects that we've done have lasted 2 months. And we've even had projects that have started in the fall and continued on throughout the whole school year. So project work doesn't really have a timeline. They don't start and finish at a certain time, but they do depend on how interested the children are, how complex what you're studying is, and how much time you actually have available to engage with the students. Do projects involve everyone? We often begin with a smaller group interest. So when projects spark and emerge in the classroom, it's often 4 or 5 children that are really interested and engaged. But then there's lots of different strategies that we use to support that project in evolving into something that more children have different parts of playing in that project. And different parts of the project are going to appeal to different children. When there's parts that are very hands-on in terms of construction, that might appeal to certain children, and other pieces that are maybe more dramatic play-based, that might appeal to other children. So in a project, all children don't have to be engaged in all pieces of it, but it's through the documentation and the sharing of it that we do engage the entire class in understanding what's happening throughout that project. And we can often choose to focus on that project as a whole group, or we can choose to keep it in a small group depending on what we want to do. But we always say just be honest with children. So when we engage in bigger projects, we will say to the class, this is something that we're going to study together. And if they say, well, I don't really like that, I don't like the fire station, or I don't like dance, or I don't like ladybugs, then we might say to them, well, maybe you'll be interested in the next project, but let's think about something that you might be interested in doing to help us in our learning in this project. So we do think of ways to engage all children based on their interests and based on their needs and their development.
And project work is really valuable because it can help us foster some skills and strategies in genuine contexts. When they're interested in a topic and they're wanting to learn more, their curiosity is drawing us to some of those questions. Well, how do I write this, and how do I measure this? So we want to always think about some of those open-ended opportunities that are coming more organically in the classroom so that we can do it in more of a genuine context. And project work is perfect for that.
We also find that when we come to writing report cards at the end of kindergarten, that a lot of that section on problem solving is engaged through the project. So we learn a lot about how children solve problems through project work. So when we go to write reports, we have information on math, we have information on literacy, we have information on their problem solving, and often we even have information on how they are able to self-regulate, how they're able to connect with their peers. So project work, essentially, a project could help you to write your entire communication of learning based on their involvement and their interactions in that project. So we're going to share a video. Now the only tricky thing with this video is it's very long, but we wanted to share this because Lillian Katz is an absolutely incredible expert. I had the pleasure of going to Iowa and studying under Lillian Katz for a week, doing a course with her to learn more about the project approach with young children, and we wanted her to explain the difference between academic and intellectual learning, and she talks a lot about project work and what it looks like and why it's important for young children. So it is a bit of a shorter or longer clip. You're going to cue it up to 10 minutes and 30 seconds, and then you'll go until 18 minutes. And it's pretty clear. You'll see that it kind of fades in and out. So it is about 7.5 minutes. But I promise you it's an incredible video, and I've watched it probably 40 times, and every time I watch it, I feel a different connection and I have a different piece of learning that I take away. Once you've watched that clip from 10:30 to 18, come back in the chat, and we want you to share one reflection that stood out to you, something that she said, something that resonated with you, something that you can connect to your practice. So Trish is going to share the link for us and come back in the chat and then let us know what resonated with you.
Lots of responses about the child's sensitivity. Great comments. Such a simple explanation of both that when we're mindful of it really does make sense once we're in the classroom.
Susanna, I always connect with that part where she talks about overly decorated classrooms. I know that at the beginning of my journey in kindergarten as well, that's how our classroom looked and felt, and we now can't imagine having a classroom that felt that way. But it took a long time to shift and change as well. Great.
Loved your comment, Melissa, about how the children's intellect and interests help guide us to assist them with their academics. We often see them approaching us more with excitement and how to do things.
I loved when you said adults being alert. I think that always stands out to me in that video about just the way that Lillian asks those questions, and the questions that she comes up with are so important, and they're so in-depth and stuff that you can tell she's really truly listening and connecting with children. It's great. So we want to just leave you with this quote because we feel that this quote really embodies everything that we believe in and how we direct ourselves in our classroom, which is engagement of their intellects provokes them to ask for help with their academic skills. And if we can engage children in worthwhile project work, worthwhile investigations, and inquiry, they are going to be much more willing and interested in progressing their own academic skills as well. So on that note, we're going to move forward and talk a little bit about our fire project. So we just wanted to give you that information to sort of set the tone, to give you some background information, and we're hoping that what we were then sharing now comes to life with the real example of what it looked like in our classroom.
So it started with an ordinary moment. We knew that there is a fire drill to be anticipated. So at the beginning of the year when we're kind of coaching the children in what to expect to help them self-regulate through that practice, we will meet as a group, talk a little bit about what they might hear, and we do a lot of role playing. We'll pretend to play, and then we'll make the ding, 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 ding sound, and practice walking to the door and the importance of how to get out safely. So as we practiced that a few times, and then when the bell went off, when we came back, there were so many questions from the kids. Why didn't we see the firefighters? Where were the trucks? How do the trucks know when to come? So many questions were being sparked, and it was, again, going back to that slowing down and really connecting with the children and taking the time to sort of talk things through and document what they were saying, that if we didn't do that, we would have missed the spark of this project that was about to unfold.
So how do projects begin? Interestingly enough, projects don't always have to come from children's interests. Often they do. You can see in that image that that's usually the biggest way that things are sparked. But sometimes it can be a teacher-initiated project. Maybe it's something that's of interest to you or something that you're thinking would be relevant to study in the community. So it can be teacher-initiated. It can be inspired by an event, which was our fire drill, or it can be something that the children are interested or wondering about.
So often a question that we get is, well, where do we start and how do we even think about what the topic might be? You want it to be relevant. A conversation that we had with a colleague once who is wanting to start project work in an older grade said, well, how do I even start this in an older grade? And we asked her, well, what's something that's common between a lot of the children in your room? And she said, well, at the beginning of the year, a lot of the children are always comparing their new shoes. So we said maybe that's a great start. It's something tangible, so they can directly observe it. They can experience it through their 5 senses. And a lot of learning can come from their experiences and interests. So you want to keep that kind of criteria in mind when you're selecting a topic.
Does the topic build on what the children already know? Does it help them to make sense of the world? Does it offer opportunities for dramatic play or representation? Does it encourage children to seek sources of information outside of school? So once you've thought about a topic, maybe you've brainstormed with your teaching partner, you've talked about it with the children, you want to look at those 4 questions will really help you to zone in and see, is this a topic that's worthy of studying? Lillian Katz often talks about projects that are worthy of study and projects that are worthy of play. A lot of topics that come up in the classroom are things that the children will engage with in play, and that doesn't mean that they're not important to the children, but they may not be something that will really help the children to engage in that project work. So we're going to show you a slide with 4 different pictures, and these are all things that may be of interest to children in one way, shape, or form, and we're wondering if you could share in the chat, or you could take the microphone if you're feeling brave, and share which of these topics do you think would be project worthy, and why? There is no right or wrong answer, but we're just interested in, of those topics, which one do you think would be a project that's the topic that's project worthy? And if you're not wanting to type it all, feel free to push that talk button and you can share too. So Sherry says the worms to help them learn about living things and how they help the world. Structures, yeah, chairs could be related to structures. Karina sharing that any topic that interests the children is worthy. Great. Lots of different thoughts and opinions, the worms in the chair. Some people are thinking all of them might be relevant and helpful. So when I went to visit Lily and Katz in Iowa, we spent an entire day talking about which projects are worthy of studying. And Lillian would say, when looking at these project topics, that chairs and worms are the only two of those four that are worthy of deeper study. Now, that doesn't mean that those other two are not things that the children are going to engage with. But if you think about Pikachu or Pokemon or some type of cartoon, how are the children going to actually study, when we go back to these pieces here, how are they going to study and help them make sense of their world? How are they going to tangibly engage with that? How are they going to use their senses to engage with that? So you're only ever going to be able to go so deep with certain topics. And we find that educators, that's where they get stuck. I don't know what else to do in this dinosaur project that we're doing. Now, if your classroom is next door to the ROM and you have an opportunity to spend multiple days or a day in the museum learning about and engaging with dinosaur bones, that may be a project that you're able to sustain a little bit longer. If you live in the country and you're close to a farm, you may study cows, because that's something that your children can see and experience and watch and sketch and be a part of. But if our school's in the city or in Toronto, studying cows might not make sense either. So a lot of the time you have to really slow down and think, because we engage with these projects because the children are interested in the topic, but oftentimes there isn't enough depth for you to go into that. So that doesn't mean, so Cheryl and I, for example, our kids love dinosaurs. So in our sensory bin, we had dinosaurs out and we had lots of different materials, shells and rocks, and they were able to engage in dramatic play with the dinosaurs. They had books about dinosaurs, they were interested in that, but we didn't consider it a project. It was a play-worthy topic where the kids were really interested. They learned new things, they learned new dinosaur names, they learned about different dinosaurs, but it wasn't a project because we couldn't study and experience it with our senses. Worms, chairs, those are things that the kids can see, touch, feel, and interact with. So none of those are right or wrong, but we just wanted to share that sort of school of thought to maybe challenge your thinking a little bit when a project does emerge, because I think that a lot of the time what happens is that project comes up, the children are interested, we engage with it right away, and we don't slow down ourselves because we're so excited and think about which topic would be most worthy for us to study alongside the children. So just short in the chat, what topics have emerged this year or in past years in your own classrooms? We'd love to hear sort of maybe some of those topics that you found really successful. Spiders, that would be great. Right now we have about 1,000 ants in our classroom. So our kids are really interested in ants, and we're wondering if that might lead us into a little mini project. Bees, volcanoes, chicks, lots of living things, how things are made. Great.
So a lot of topics where I can initially see how all five senses would be used and how it could be tangible, and that's really going to support you in going deeper in that project. A lot of times we get stifled in sort of how do we keep the momentum going, but if we're not using all of our five senses, that's where the struggle becomes in the early years.
Great. Lots of good, simple topics, lots of hands-on things that are nature-based. I saw someone mention above construction. We actually had a construction project because the same as they said, sometimes things are happening in your community, and it's so important to slow down and engage with those things and think about how can we use this? Are they building something close by? Can we study that? Can we study what's going on there? What's happening in your own local community is often the very best things to study that are project worthy because the kids can observe them on a daily basis. Thanks for sharing.
So after the conversation of the fire drill, there's so many questions that came up in the conversation that it was really hard to kind of figure out where to start our project because it wasn't a clear vision of, okay, they're interested in just the firefighters or they're interested in just the trucks. So what we did was we generated a teacher web, and it just helped us brainstorm a lot of ideas and knowledge about the topic and kind of get our brain muscles kind of warmed up as to all the possibilities of where this project could go and end up and anticipate for. And then after we were done the teacher web, you can see here that was sort of our train of thinking.
And Cheryl and I will often, the first stage that we often will do is we'll just take a bunch of small sticky notes and we'll write down any word that makes us think about fire. And then we then can take the stickies and start to organize and sort them as a team. And then we draw this mind map together. So we often will just write anything that we can think about on these little sticky notes and then reorganize them to create our own teacher web.
And with that said, afterwards, we then did some webbing with the children. So we used our conversations, we used resources and books, and in small groups, we compiled many webs, and it helped us see some of the patterns and trends of things that were of interest to the children. And it also provided some of those children who might be a little anxious in whole group settings to provide a safe space where they felt like their voice could be heard and so that they were comfortable in sharing some of their thinking.
Melissa just has a question about sensory bins and how they relate to the projects being studied. So I know Cheryl mentioned at the beginning that everything in our room, so when we were doing this fire project, none of our sensory bins were really related to the fire project because it just didn't make sense. So sometimes they are, for sure, depending on what we're studying. But our sensory bins often have a focus on interactive opportunities for the children. So they often build lots of personal and social development skills, lots of pouring, mixing, transporting. We did a really great course with Tom Bedard, and he talked a lot about how to use sensory bins to really engage with problem solving in young children. So we don't often like bury letters in our sand or make it into a sensory bin that is connected to those things, but sometimes there's dramatic play elements too. Hopefully that's helpful. These are just a couple of the pictures of the web. So we posted all of the webs in our classroom as we were engaging with them with the small group. And then we wanted to develop a plan for sharing. So you think of your topic, then you start to web yourself as an educator because sometimes that'll give you lots of venues that you weren't sure you were going to go. Then we do a student web. Then we start to develop a plan for sharing. So how are we going to share all of the project work that happens throughout the project? How are we going to document the learning? And then we think about what would make most sense for that project. Are we going to have a project binder where we just collect different pieces of documentation, student writing, student drawing, sketching? Are we going to have a documentation panel? So for example, we did a ramp project where our children created all sorts of different ramps, and instead of putting it in a binder, we created a panel on the wall. And how are the students going to be involved in that documentation process? Documentation is often a catalyst for project work, and you can use that documentation to reflect on what the children have known, what the children are learning, and where the children are going next in their plan.
So to choose a starting point for our fire project, and the common theme in all of the webs was the uniform. So we thought that would be a great way to start. We reached out to our local firefighters that were just around the corner from our school, and they were able to come in, allow the children to touch the material, learn about the material, how it is worn, and also try it on so that they had that full experience of what it's like to wear a uniform. You also want to brainstorm materials that could support some of the learning. So as we were having some site visits and meeting with some of the local firefighters, we got some donations and thought about what could also be added to our dramatic play area. So you see the wheels here, just to enhance some of the play so that they could scaffold some of the learning that they were noticing. We always say, go into your staff room and ask for the world and see what you get. It's amazing how many people will be able to donate things out of your excitement through a project.
We also then start to brainstorm materials that are print. So what types of books, magazines, flyers, brochures, maps, articles, what can we find both professionally for us and for the children? So when a project first gets started, we often take some time and start to research what print materials are going to be supportive in this project. Reading aloud to children or having books available in your building area or in your book nook area is a really simple way to engage with that project and support that learning in for the children too. So we always try to bring in children's literature. We find that it sparks more questions and it can provide a lot of factual information. We're at a school where there's a lot of English language learners, so we find that project work supports a lot of vocabulary development, and it may even support some of the questions and some of the things that the children are wondering about. And so in this fire project, our children, we had a basket of books in our building area, and they would often take the books out, open it up to a different picture, and use that picture to spark some of their imaginative play. Imagine this was happening. Now we have to be the firefighters. What are we going to do? So they use that children's literature in their play to support their development and to guide what they were doing. We will come back to that question, Martha. It's a really good question.
We also brainstorm vocabulary and how students might encounter and learn as the project is unfolding. We also want to think about how we're going to share or display the new vocabulary that's introduced so that it can also be revisited throughout the project. So we always think of documentation needing to be this full piece of in-depth knowledge of the experience that was just shared, but this was a simple piece that was added into our project binder. We have a lot of ELL learners in our school community, and so we thought this was the perfect way of taking a quick snapshot, and then we added the word of the uniform piece to the binder so that when they were reflecting on the binder, they could repeat and rehear some of the pieces that are involved when putting it on before entering the fire.
It also supported some of the children who were doing some writing, because when you're in project work, they often will write about different things that are happening. So if you have a vocabulary list with some photos of real things that have happened or real experiences in the room, then the children know where they can go to find that word quickly and easily, like I am wearing boots. They can find the word boots in the project binder, and that will support them in their writing as well. We also always connect with families fairly early on in the project. When you connect with families, they are able to support in lots of different ways. So they may have props or materials at home. We get so many different donations from families. When we were in the midst of a construction project, we had a family who dad was a foreman and gave us all of the scrap wood from all of the different job sites. So then we didn't have to spend any of our own money because they were able to donate all of the work to support our project. So involving families and sharing with them what's happening can be really supportive. Many of the families might also be those experts or connections, maybe mom or dad or grandma or grandpa or aunt or uncle. They work at a fire hall, or maybe they're a pilot, or maybe they are working on a construction site. So they may have a connection to support you in having experts come into the room or finding places for your class to visit to learn more about it. Once a month in our school, in our classroom, I should say, we have what we call an open house, and this year we've changed it a little bit and we call it Family Friday. And for about 45 minutes at the end of the day, before the bell rings, we invite all of our families into the classroom, and at that time they're able to look at their documentation binders, they're able to spend time playing with the children, and it's been such a powerful experience because the parents then and the families are a part of the project process. They're able to see what's happening, they're able to see the different stages, and they feel more deeply connected to it as well. So that's been a really great way for us to connect and build those relationships with families, and we do that once a month. We choose all of the dates in the fall, and we share all those dates with our families in advance so that if they have a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment, they can book that, or they could maybe ask an aunt or an uncle or a grandma or a grandpa to come to that family day, and it provides us with an opportunity to connect and build relationships with all of our families.
So like Tracy mentioned earlier, you want to seek out some of those experts and field visits. Where we went with this project was the fire station, the firehouse, which is a trailer that's mimicking a house that the firefighters had brought for the school-wide, where they got to go in and role play sort of how you would get out of a house when there is a fire. And also connecting with your local firefighters. The most important thing about all of this is when you are brainstorming this, think about those people or places that you can go to multiple times, because it's great that when you can keep checking in, every time you go observe something or ask something, you can build on previous knowledge. So think about how close are those things are accessible for you, or transportation so that you can get there easy, because multiple visits will help sustain the project as well. So you can see here, we are connecting with one of our local firefighters. When they came in to role play some of the ways that you could stay safe during a fire, what we did as a whole group, often when we have visitors come in during project work, we will record the children's questions so that when it comes to the visitor saying, does anybody have a question, and a child raises their hand and all of a sudden they're talking about their new dog that they have at their house, we wanted to keep it connected and on the same page to keep the conversation going. So we record the children's questions, and then that way the visitor can keep connected to the topic, and also when we are documenting, it helps us support in writing and supporting the children as well. Again, staying connected, this local firefighter was great. He was able to FaceTime us when we had questions. He came in and role played with the children as new learning was happening in the building area, or if there is a material that we wanted to investigate more. So again, think of those experts in field visits that you can see repeatedly over and over. We also provided our children with an opportunity to write to a local firefighter, and they would write letters to him, we would send them, and he would respond and write back to the children too. So sometimes project work can really inspire and engage the children in things like writing that then support their fine motor development, their ability to construct a letter, their letter sound knowledge. So we put out just a photograph of the firefighter and his name, and the children were then able to record messages to write to him to ask him questions or just to stay connected as well. So to keep on this topic, we want to open up the conversation again to you. What community field visits have you done with students during project work? And are there any experts that you have connected with during project work? Sometimes when we just brainstorm together, it helps us think of some of the things that are in our own community, or might jog our memory of who we could ask. So we want to open it up to you now.
That's a great one, Sherry. A naturalist from a local provincial park. There's actually, I think it's Microsoft that has experts that you can have on FaceTime and on Skype, and it's amazing. So there's lots of different experts that will like go behind the falls in Niagara Falls. So if your kids are interested in something that maybe isn't closely connected, you can go online and connect for free with a lot of these experts, and they'll give you tours of different museums and natural parks. So that's really cool too. Great. Veterinarians, dental hygienists, lots of community helpers are obviously interested. Wow, Paula, that's really cool. The snowplow driver, that would be so fascinating for so many of the children.
That is cool.
Farmers, Indigenous elders, that would be beautiful too. Great. Yeah, using parents. So a parent who's a professional violin player is incredible. The children are so fascinated with music and how music's made. So knowing what your parents do and how they can support. Even last year when we did a project that kind of evolved into our little mini McDonald's project, one of our families the parent was a manager at McDonald's. So we toured a McDonald's restaurant. We learned about how the cash register works. We learned about how they prepare food. And so sometimes it's something that's not expected, but knowing your families and what they do can also really support and help that.
Patty, I like how you mentioned how you videotaped on your field visit. That's such a great way to document and even transcribe later on.
Kirsten's asking, did we take public transit? We often use our public transit system. We take the city bus a lot, especially because children in our region that are under 5 go for free. So all of our volunteers pay for, like the adults pay for a ticket and all the kids go for free. So it's always an adventure. When we went to the headquarters for fire a couple of years ago, and we took the 2 city buses to get there. And when we went to McDonald's, we took the city bus as well. So it's a great experience. I think the kids sometimes love the bus as much as they love the actual trip too.
So again, we want to provide a context and experience for play and learning. Often we could speak to the children about what happens, but when they're in the actual environment where they could be hands-on and experience things and test things, when we found after our visit from the local fire station, when we came back, their dramatic play was so much more advanced because they had that real-life context and experience within the fire station.
I think that's a great point too, Cheryl, because oftentimes when we set up these dramatic play experience based on interest or inquiry, we have something like a vet's office where children, many of their experiences at a veterinarian's office are maybe not positive, maybe their animal's sick, maybe they haven't actually even been into a vet's office, and we wonder why children struggle with a lot of the dramatic play that surrounds those things. We once set up an airport with our kids because they were interested in airports, and then we started to realize many of our kids have never been to an airport. So we have to sometimes slow down, scale back, and think about, do they have enough context for this dramatic play, and how can we support them in enhancing that without stretching ourselves too thin either? So field visits help us the children to understand the materials that they engage with, and that way when they are engaged in dramatic play, they have a lot more knowledge about what they're doing and saying.
So you can even see the complexity here in some of the way they even laid out some of the materials. After talking to one of the dispatchers at the station, they were able to understand how the importance of a map and how to take calls and how to record some of the important notes and what computer was used for what. So you can see all the details that are now coming up in the building area, and even the language that was developing through a conversation between the dispatcher and the person that was in harm, or the firefighter in the situation. As they were role-playing, their language was becoming much more complex as well. You can see how they even set out here in the building area. So they have the dispatcher over to the far right. They have their kitchen. They got a tour of there and how it was important to build community, and also all the little buttons and wheels. And you can see their little air tanks on the fire truck, and how important it is to have your equipment ready so that when the fire is happening, you can get on your truck and be dressed and ready to go really quickly.
The children also noticed a big map on the wall when we visited the fire station. So when they came back, they recreated their own maps, and the firefighters explained how the maps helped them to understand where the calls were coming from and where they needed to go. So now you can start to see some numeracy and some spatial reasoning coming into this learning. And they use that, the dispatchers and the firefighters in the classroom use those tools that they created. We just we photocopied their maps so that they had multiple copies of it, and then the dispatcher would listen to the call and then tell the firefighters where they needed to go next while they were role-playing.
They showed the children how to be safe, what might happen to a person when they are being rescued. They also were really great with showing them safe ways of how to pretend and role model when you are doing that in the classroom. Again, one of the firefighters did come in and play alongside the children, so there was a lot of conversation of how to do that safely when you are role playing. So you can see one of the firefighters attending one of the children in this picture here, and some of the questionings that they would ask prior to giving first aid. Here's some of the firefighters communicating where to go. You can see one has the hose ready in the back, another one's on a cell phone trying to talk to the dispatcher of where it's located, and a lot of negotiating had come up into this play, and compromise and team building.
And you can also see here, it's very child created, and a lot of the time the dramatic play evolves as the play continues. So you can see that they use lids from their water bottles and yogurt containers to create the different buttons on the fire trucks that they studied so often when we went to visit. So they started to add more detail the more that they learned through their books, their site visits, and their interviews to enhance their dramatic play as well. So dramatic play really benefits from our support. When they understand their roles, it helps them to understand better how to engage in that dramatic play. Educators can then, if we get involved in dramatic play, we find that it changes it so incredibly. And so Cheryl and I will often, this year there's a huge fascination with babies, and every day the children are saying to us, let's play babies. And so we actually get involved with the play, become a part of that play, and then we can embed language when we're role playing, we can scaffold language development, and we can help to sustain that dramatic play. There are times that we look over at our dramatic play area and both of us are like, oof, I don't know, that looks really busy over there. Do you want to go in? Do you want me to go in? And so we still think about those things, but being a part of that dramatic play makes such a huge difference in supporting the children in their engagement too.
And I think one thing that Tracy and I do to support that is when we are supporting, for this instance, the dramatic play that was happening in the building area, we are very intentional about how we're going to foster that. So if Tracy was role-playing with the children, I would be up and floating and supporting the rest of the children that maybe weren't engaged in that part of the project. And then maybe the next day I would be engaged in that role-play again if it was still something that was of interest to the children, and Tracy would be up and floating and supporting the rest of the classroom. That way everyone was sort of being attended to and fostered in the appropriate way with the right attention.
So is the station left out or cleaned up each day? We believe in allowing the children to reconstruct things. So we did keep the fire station up for a few days, and then eventually we had a basket where the children had all of the materials and they could construct and reconstruct it whenever they chose to. That way, if they weren't interested in engaging with fire project anymore, they didn't have that entire building area taken over. So we no longer switch our dramatic play or building area permanently. We provide the children with some materials and we'll leave them out there for them to reset it up. But if they wanted to just play house one day and they didn't want to engage with it, that's also an option for them too. So providing lots of open-ended materials in our art studio helps with the construction of props in everyday learning, but also in project work. So can you collect cardboard, boxes, different types of tape, staples, different types of paper, lots of recycled materials. All of those things will support the children in testing their theories, in creating their own props. We try and have the children create as much as they need. And so we don't force it, but we engage with them and support them in creating all of their own props that they need to sustain their play.
Here they were trying to construct some of the helmets and air tanks that were involved in the project. And again, so often sometimes when a project is evolving and props are being made, because there's so much excitement, we get involved so quickly. So this is a situation of where they had the fire helmet and they wanted to create the visor that protected their eyes. and they wanted us to help cut. And we said, well, how do you know where you're going to cut and how long it will be? And so they fiddled with this measuring tape for a long period of time and tested theories. And here they had some overhead paper. They saw the transparency of how it could be used, and they went back and forth and back and forth, and some pieces were just thrown out, but that was okay because we wanted them to allow them to test those theories of measurement and build on their fine motors of cutting. So it's okay for those little things. It looks so simple here in the photo, but that took 3 days to create because of all of the thinking and perseverance that had to take place. Here's just a simple way of how we collected, made badges. We noticed there is a lot of need for fine motor development in their muscles. So we had this on the light table where they could trace the outline and then color it in after. And again, props for supporting role playing. They had the air tanks and the helmets. So that they could scaffold some of the conversations and learning that was happening from our field visits.
So Cheryl mentioned that we had the firehouse come to our school. It was a great opportunity for the kids to practice a safe escape plan, and they were able to they emulate the smoke inside. They talked about the hot doors and how to get out of the building. They practiced different escape routes, and that inspired the children to start to create their own escape plans. So then when we came back into the classroom, a lot of the children were trying to draw maps. They were trying to draw pictures of their homes and think about how would they get out of their home safely and where would they meet their family. So it inspired a lot of construction of maps and plans in the classroom, but it also inspired some great conversations at home with their families. What do you do when a project loses momentum? We can often revisit those webs. So sometimes you get to a point in the project and you're not quite sure where it's going. So go back to those webs and say, what else is there in this project that we've brainstormed or the children have brainstormed? What else are they interested in? How else can we take this? Is there a different visitor that we can go and see? Is there a different place that we could go and visit? Sometimes you might take a break. Maybe you'll take a break for a couple of weeks and then it'll reemerge. Sometimes projects come back and forth to be based on the children's interests or sparks that are happening in the classroom. So just continue to observe what the children are doing and saying, and that will often help to guide you along with those webs and along with what you've documented already.
So again, when we revisited the web, another trend and pattern that we saw was they were very interested in the fire trucks. So we made multiple visits to the fire station and invited the children to document what they see. And each time we went, it invited them to notice something different and with more detail. So they might have been focusing on the wheels or the lights or the ladder. But when we did the drafts, and again, if Ron Berger's text, that we shared earlier would really support some of the drafting process and some of the language that you could use. But after each draft, we would label it first, second, and third so that we could also document some of the progressions and what they were seeing and noticing from each visit. Here's some of the sketches that took place. You can see some of the labeling that's also starting to happen. And then it came to the point where there's a lot of conversation of them wanting to build a fire truck. So again, reaching out to any connection that you had. This was my grandfather, who is also a carpenter, and he came in and talked to the children about how we could make a fire truck. I had showed him a lot of their sketchings, and we had talked about some of the elements that they wanted to be included. And when he discussed it with the children, he also wanted their input of, how big are we going to make this? So there was a large concern of how are we going to make sure that no matter what firefighter was in the truck, it would fit them because they're all various heights. So we all took each other's measurements and were able to ensure that everyone could fit inside. The images that you can see here, he also explained what was inside of a truck. So when they were constructing it, they had to think about the frame and then how they would do the woodworking outside of it. Here you can see again, they're measuring all the children to make sure that even the tallest and shortest child could fit into the fire truck. And then the beautiful part is sometimes when we're not in the moment and we let an expert take lead, it allows for new learning to come. So a lot of the children were wanting to paint the fire truck, and it was beautiful because it's nothing that we would have maybe even thought or of saying, but he was very provided the children with a lot of information of the strategies and techniques of how to use the paint so that it wouldn't clump, and how do you make it even so that it could really emulate the vision of the fire truck. You can see new tools that are coming into play. Again, building on that fine motor. Sketching, again, a lot of the children love to sketch the stages of each of the building process when we were constructing the fire truck.
And after they finished, Cheryl's grandfather actually built that frame, like she said, inside so they could actually drive and move the fire truck around outdoors. So we had them sketch, we had them draw what they were seeing afterwards with our fire truck to see if it had enough detail and if it would work. There was lots of testing of theories in this. We could have written an entire report card on most of our children based on this one project. Many of the children came in and out of the project, and I know a question earlier is, what do you do with children who just aren't interested at all? And we often find that the more a project progresses, the more children will become interested. Because if you start to share the documentation and they start to see the construction of really interesting things, they become interested in it. And if they're not, that's okay. There's lots of other learning opportunities that are going to happen in the classroom for those children too. So we don't have to stress or pressure children into it, but the excitement of project work, when a true project comes up, we have found that 99% of our children are full force a part of the project in their own way. Project work is beautiful because it has so many different entry points for so many different learners. Children who struggle with language, children who have strong language, children who are reading, children who don't know how to read. There's always different entry points and places for them, and they're learning in that project work too. So, what questions do you have? That was our fire project. It took place over almost an entire year. It was an incredible experience. Like we said, not everything in our room was related to fire at all times, but there was definitely a lot of excitement and discussion around project or around firefighting and being a firefighter and how we could fight fires and how we could create a truck. But what questions do you have from us before we start to wrap up? Is it a way to start project work from daycare? Lily and Kat actually talks a lot in her book and online about project work from very, very early on. So project work can definitely be a part of childcare and daycare programs in the early years, and I've seen project work in action with children as young as 2. So definitely it can be something that is done with younger children as well. If you connect with her book and some of her articles online, that would probably support you. I know that Melissa asked about, I was just going to get to that, Melissa, about documentation binders. So in our classroom, each child has a portfolio. And in their portfolio are various pieces of documentation, both from project work, learning and play, some of their writing or some of their engagement. So each child in our room has a documentation portfolio. But we also do have project binders in our room where we collect all of the documentation, the sketching, the pictures, the transcripts, all of that from a project, and we keep it in that binder too. So we do kind of do both. We would often say that individualized portfolios are a lot of work. We've been working together for 7 years, and we still struggle to maintain them at times. And a lot of people have shifted towards digital documentation. So it's somewhat of a preference, but project binders are so powerful because you can add all of the stuff and collect all of your journey throughout, and it really tells a beautiful story as you complete a project or as a project comes to an end to see where we were at the beginning, where was the children's thinking at the beginning, and now where is their thinking and understanding and growth at the end. So Patty's asking about our big dramatic play area. So we have 30 children in our class, And we do have tables for all and chairs for all of those students, but we were very intentional. We do have a very large room and we're very blessed with that, but we were also very intentional in setting up our rooms so that our dramatic play area and our building area are connected. So much of that play connects with each other, and so we've created them together, and we have two really large open spaces. We have a dance studio in our room, and we have our building area. So when we meet as a whole group, we can meet in either of those areas, and that way if we're saving something for a project, we have that flexible meeting space so we could meet in either area. But we do have seats for all of our children in the classroom.
We approach parent council for funds. We try not to tap into our families too much because we also want to honor some of the other financial needs that they might have to support at home. So we always try and strive for what's close, what's in our community, what can we reach out to our colleagues for in order for support. It is amazing when you start talking about it with people how many connections and donations that you can make. Not to say that we haven't gone on field trips where we did have to pay for things, but we want to try and be mindful of how much we are asking of our families.
So Natasha's wondering, how many hours do we spend per week on a project? It really varies. It depends on how in-depth the project work is that week. So when we were actually constructing that fire truck, some of the children spent all day working on it. So for the entire learning block, they were doing that. Other times there's just like short moments of a half hour where we've been doing some really intentional sketching. So project work can take larger chunks of time, and it can also be small moments throughout the day. There's not really a designated way to do it.
That's a great feedback, Karina. Thanks for adding that about Twitter. Even when you're asking for donations, if it is on a school letterhead from your home school, a lot of people will be willing to donate. But we found this common trend was it has to be on letterhead when you are approaching them face to face.
Awesome. So if you watched this webinar and you weren't live with us, or if you have some questions after you've sort of mulled through some of this material, please feel free to reach out to us on social media. Tweeting your questions is great because then we can tweet back and share that with everybody. You can also connect with us via email too. So we're going to end up there, and I know that Trish is going to come back, and she's going to talk a little bit about how you can provide some feedback and sort of your next steps. So if you could just hang tight for a couple of minutes, Trish is going to share our next steps for us.
Perfect. That's wonderful timing. All right. First thing I'm going to do is stop the recording right now to hear a voice.